Hi, everyone. I'm Bill Squadron, President of Our Energy Policy, and welcome to our webinar today on the future of natural gas, which, as everyone who's listening is undoubtedly aware, is such a monumental part of our energy landscape. In the past few years has become so significant when it comes to technology, economics, and of course the energy transition. We have a phenomenal group to be discussing this topic today, and I want to welcome all of you to our event. First and foremost, I'd like to thank our partners who support our energy policy and all of our programs. As you can see on the screen here, it's a very eclectic, large, and growing group of partners who support our efforts to bring civil and substantive dialogue to the difficult energy issues around policy that we all face, bringing together different voices in serious discussion, and then making that available as a resource to government, to media, to the energy community as a whole, and frankly, the support of our partners, which we're so grateful for all of our programs, one of which I'd like to call your attention to, which is the Our Energy Library you can find on our site. There is actually a listing on your dashboard for this event, which will take you there, and we've highlighted a number of the materials on natural gas that are in the library, which is designed to be a resource for all of you out there as you work on your various issues. Last point I'd like to make before we launch into things is that if you do have questions, we'll get to questions from the audience the second part of the hour. Use the question tab on your dashboard, type in your question, and we will get to as many questions as we possibly can. We're also going to have an online discussion about this topic following the webinar today. So if we can't get to every question, there'll be plenty of opportunity to engage in dialogue and raise the issues that you find need to be further explored. So thank you again for joining us. Before we get to our panel, we are very pleased to have as our kickoff speaker, Orlando Alvarez, who will be delivering opening remarks and then paving the way for the discussion. Orlando Alvarez is the president and CEO of the BP Energy Company, a member of the BP Americas board, has been in the energy industry for more than 3 decades, and we are really grateful to have his expertise in giving some opening remarks and starting off the conversation. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Orlando to deliver some opening remarks, and after which we'll get to our panel. Orlando?
Thank you, Bill, and I'm honored to co-host the event, BP to co-host the event and offer the opening remarks. You know, at 25 years at BP, like you said, 30 plus years in the natural gas industry here in the U.S. This is a topic that's actually quite I'm familiar with, and it's very dear to my heart. As I was thinking about, the last couple of days about these remarks, I reflected back on an interview that I did back in August of 19. I did a live interview with Bloomberg on the exact topic, the future of natural gas, and thinking back 2 years ago, to where we are today, still some really big commonalities. I mean, this market, natural gas is still in abundant supply, sitting at over 90 BCF a day. We have volatility still in the market. 2019 was known for volatility. We still have that. And back in 19, we were starting to talk about how this market was a global market. We had LNG export facilities coming on, and now you see almost double the volume that was back in 19. We have over 11 BCF a day of gas that's hitting the water from the U.S. So a lot of things have stayed pretty constant over the last couple of years, but we've also had a significant amount of change. And things are evolving very fast when it comes to natural gas as part of the energy transition. So when you think about the unprecedented growth in population around the world, targeting 9 billion people by 2040, the energy mix is changing. Technologies are advancing, consumer preferences are shifting, And there's a number of policies that are evolving as well. We believe that natural gas, the future of natural gas, is still very strong and is still a very big part of the energy transition. But things are changing. Even within our own company at BP, we've made a really dramatic change over the last year, announcing an ambition to become a zero emissions company by 2050. And I know there's other other global companies that have also have those goals. We're also doing our part to make sure that the world reaches their goals as well. So it's not just about our own company, but also helping the world get there. So how are we doing this? Just a quick blip on BP, and I'll turn it back to gas here. But we are committing to lower our emissions from BP's global operations by 30 to 35% by 2030. That's very ambitious, but we're making that commitment. We're increasing our investment in low carbon businesses, and we're reducing our oil and gas production by 40%. And when we say that, and other commitments as well, but when we say that, that usually catches a lot of people's attention, like reducing oil and gas by 40%. Why and where does natural gas fit in that statement? So this is something I want to be really clear about, is we are shifting the company to now an integrated energy company. We're not just an oil and gas company. And the portfolio of fuels is changing, and that is our commitment as we move to net zero. But hydrocarbons continues to be core to our strategy, and we believe that natural gas has a future in that. We believe that it's going to enable and expedite the transition. So, but there's still a lot of work to do, and the industry is doing it, which is really what I wanted to touch on. And some of these are very obvious. I'm sure you all know this, but it's something we need to continue to reinforce. Far lower emissions than coal when burnt for power. We've taken out 550 million tons of CO2 just over the last decade by coal to gas switching. As more renewables comes on, gas, and by the way, in the BP Outlook, we believe that by the year 2040, we could have an energy mix of 14% renewables, which is more than double where it is today. Gas has a place in that. It's the intermittent fuel. We have seasonal storage, and in some cases can land cheaper. It can now be decarbonized, captured, and stored. In a number of CCUS projects all over the country, all over the world. Technology is getting better, the economics are becoming better, and that's something, again, BP is also involved with and looking at. Fourth item, I mean, it can produce hydrogen. As part of the Hydrogen Council, BP is supporting hydrogen as a key element of the energy transition, and you're starting to hear more and more companies getting into the technologies, whether it's blue hydrogen, obviously using natural gas, or more green hydrogen in the renewable space. But that is a fuel that we will continue to see grow into the future. And then the last point here to make is the industry is doing a lot around getting methane reductions at the wellhead and across all the entire value chain. And this is something that producers and consumers together are coming together to create a cleaner natural gas product. At BP, we've announced a new ambition to end routine flaring on our onshore business operations in the U.S. by 2025, to reduce our intensity to 0.20 or better by 2025. We've improved our monitoring programs, et cetera. So again, quite a lot of work the industry is doing around methane reduction as well, and monitoring, which is a tremendous amount of, it's a lot of effort, but a lot of progress has been made over the last year. So when you think about this, what I've just mentioned, there's quite a bit of work in progress to ensure that natural gas continues to stay as a competitive fuel in the mix. It's an exciting time for the industry, but I would say that it's important that we, as an industry, stay together and work with regulators and help people understand what we are doing to improve the natural gas and the CO2 and the emissions of natural, all the things that we're doing. It's important that we communicate that across the industry. And then the last thing, again, it's just when we talk about the energy transition, it's making sure that natural gas is in the narrative, that it's not left out. Because right now there's a lot of talk about renewables, which absolutely plays a huge part in it. But it's not a race to renewables. I always say it's a race to lower carbon, and gas has a place in the transition. So with that, I'll leave it now to the panel, as I'm sure they have a lot more to say on this. So let me turn it back over to Bill, and thank you for your time.
Orlando, thank you very much for those comments and for laying the groundwork. Our thanks again to BP for co-hosting this event, and we're now going to turn it over to our panel. I'd like to introduce as our moderator David Carroll, who is the president of the Gas Technology Institute, president and CEO of that organization, as well as the former president of the International Gas Union. And David will bring on our panelists and continue the discussion on the topic that Orlando so eloquently laid out. David?
Thank you, Bill, and thank you, Orlando, for those important framing comments. It's great to be with all of you today and to join the experts that I'll be introducing in a moment to discuss the importance of natural gas in our nation's energy mix. We're going to offer some thoughts on the state of the industry today, but perhaps more importantly, we'll be looking ahead to the role that gas infrastructure, and the role that gas companies can play in a lower carbon energy system. So with us today, let me introduce Ms. Paula Glover, who is the president of the Alliance to Save Energy. Paula, welcome. She assumed that position in January of this year, actually, so congratulations, and is just the 7th president in that alliance's 43-year history. Previously, Paula served as president and CEO of the American Association of Blacks in Energy, where she was responsible for managing the national office and providing strategic direction for the organization. Paula's other experience includes more than 15 years in the energy sector, working for both electric and natural gas utilities. And then finally, Ms. Glover has served on the National Petroleum Council since 2014. We're also joined by Richard Meyer, who is the Vice President of Energy Markets, Analysis, and Standards at the American Gas Association. Hi, Richard. And the AGA, as many of you know, represents more than 200 local energy companies that deliver natural gas throughout the United States. And Richard is responsible for overseeing AGA's energy markets, analysis, and codes and standards activities that support the organization's outreach to advance awareness of the vital role that natural gas utilities serve in meeting the needs of their communities and meeting the needs of a clean energy economy. And finally, Ross Torini. And Ross is National Grid's New York Chief Gas Operating Officer, or COO, and is accountable for the safe and reliable operation of the New York gas system. Ross has been with National Grid for 28 years, starting as a gas operation and construction field services engineer. And during that tenure, he's held a variety of roles, including VP of US Procurement, VP of Gas Engineering, acting Senior Vice President of the US Network Strategies for both electric and gas, and most recently as the US Chief Gas Engineer. Ross sits on the board of the American Gas Association, so watch out, Richard, your boss is on the panel with you, and also the Northeast Gas Association. So that's our panel. It's a great lineup. So let's get rolling with our first question. And I'm going to lob this one over to you, Paula, first, with perhaps a level setting question. So to understand where we're going as an industry, it's often helpful to understand sort of where we are now. And could you provide some brief thoughts on the state of the industry and what we've seen perhaps since the market shock and the economic shocks brought about by COVID over the last 15, 16 months?
Sure, and thank you, thank you, Bill and that team for the invitation to be with you today. I am excited about this conversation, and I'm just going to say a little bit to set a bit of context and stage, and talk a little bit about why I think efficiency matters even in this conversation. You know, we've started to see a big transformation, really, if you think, going back towards when the Obama administration came into office, and we started to really have more gas on the market because of the shale revolution and a shift from coal to other sources as a way to reduce carbon and address climate change. And over time, we've seen more renewables come online, and the price of renewable energy go down. And so for some, the focus then is to go to full electrification to meet our decarbonization goals. I would say that we have to remember that while we may get to full electrification on the consumer energy side, I don't believe that's going to happen in 2 years. I think there's a long runway for that. And we have not gotten to a place where we can talk about the industrial use of gas. And so this idea that gas is going to go away, I don't think that's going to happen. And if it does, it's certainly not going to be quickly. So we need to be thinking about that. But at the end of the day, electrification, all these things are just tools for decarbonization. So in my mind, electrification is one tool. CCUS is another tool as we think about decarbonization. There are lots of tools in the toolbox that we can use and we should use to get to our climate goals. At the same time, we still need to be thinking about how do we have efficient use of our resources. That is most important, because that's going to get us there. If you're someone who's focused solely on climate, efficiency is going to get you there quicker and least expensive, right, than anything else. So we want to think about that. For us at the Alliance, we are focused on how do we help, support, and encourage more efficient use of gas appliances, and how do we use gas more efficiently in our manufacturing processes. That is incredibly important. And then thinking about what are the other tools, the other technologies. It's too soon, I think, to guess which technology is going to rise to the top in our 2030, 35, 2040, 2050 future. I don't think we know, because I would suggest when we started this transition 16 years ago, we didn't know that we would be here. We didn't know that CCUS would be popular. We had no idea. And so giving the space and time to allow technology to catch up and do what it does, at the same time, efficiently using the resources that we have in place today. And gas is absolutely one of those that's incredibly important.
Great. Thank you, Paula, for those comments. Energy efficiency is clearly going to be a major component of addressing the future. Richard, can I toss this over to you? How have your many companies that make up the AGA survived the last 16 months? And so where does the industry sit today from your perspective?
I was thinking about where we've been over the past, let's say, 18 months. And one word comes to mind, and it's resilient. So AGA, we represent those local distribution companies that deliver natural gas to homes and to businesses in all 50 states. And when we look at the market, broadly speaking, over the past 18 months, these companies, the fuel that's delivered remained reliable. It remained resilient. Energy deliveries when customers need it most, 24/7, 365. So there have been challenges. Recently, we've seen what happened in Texas, and broadly speaking, the cold weather event that did affect large swaths of the country. We can talk about how the whole industry performed, and there were challenges upstream and in different parts of the value chain. When we look at the performance of natural gas utilities during that cold weather event, energy service to gas utility customers remained largely uninterrupted. This is a strong, reliable, resilient system that is designed to perform under the coldest days of the year. So that's what I see. I see an industry that is working hard to deliver efficient, using Paula's word, which is a cornerstone strategy, efficient, reliable, and clean energy service services to customers every day of the year.
Great, thanks, Richard. And you brought up an interesting topic, that being the deep freeze that took place in Texas that affected the grid and so many elements of the energy ecosystem down there. And let's couple that with that recent ransomware attack that took place with Colonial Pipeline. So I think our energy system has shown and that it's not immune to interruptions. So Ross, I'm going to look to you for a second, maybe since we just migrated to that topic, whether it's from the industry perspective or from Grid's perspective, what's your take on how the industry is preparing for potential of greater climate instability, but also actions by bad actors? How do we maintain the integrity and resiliency of that system?
So thanks, David. I mean, this is a point that everybody in the industry is really focused on, and it was actually part of our discussion at our AGA Board of Directors meeting yesterday. So really, from two perspectives, I think Richard really honed in on the first aspect. You know, the natural gas system in the U.S. is really hardened and designed for heavy winter operations. You know, and when you look at the reliability of the natural gas system, it really actually translates into the reliability of home heating. Right? Because that's where a lot of our customers get that heating. And if you look at that, it's really close to 100%. You know, large scale gas outages are black swan events that very, very rarely happen. But now we also have to factor in the resiliency when you start to talk about climate change. You know, and you start to take a look at what some of the work that we're particularly been doing in the New York City area, in looking at the 500-year floodplain as we look to harden our gas infrastructure in flood-prone zones. And then, you know, there's a big push into cyber and cybersecurity right now. And, you know, I can't go into a lot of the details of things that we National Grid are doing, but we have done we've been on this cyber journey for about 4 or 5 years now, and we're very confident, right, in the cybersecurity efforts that we have in place to protect the operation of our pipelines.
Great. Thank you, Ross. Any other comments from Paula or Richard on the issue of system reliability and resiliency at this point? No? Well, let's...
David, just real quick, I will say that you know, this is a key focus of the industry right now. And AGA has been committed to addressing cybersecurity concerns for many years. This is not my area of focus necessarily within the association, but I can know that AGA's supported cybersecurity reviews of AGA member companies since 2014. We've supported a cyber peer review based on TSA security guidelines. So we are all in on addressing these cyber issues, making sure AGA member companies have the tools in place so that they can do what they need to do to address these concerns. And as Ross noted, the board is absolutely committed to cybersecurity, and it just underscores how these companies are committed to the safe and reliable delivery of clean natural gas to homes and businesses, and that includes increasingly making sure we're ahead of the curve on the cybersecurity front.
Great. Thank you. So let's pivot to the future just a little bit and shift our conversation. So just this week, the IEA came out with a new flagship report, and it's entitled Net Zero, 2050, a roadmap for the global energy sector, with some vast implications for fossil fuels, including gas. Now, we won't speak to specifics about that, but I am going to toss a question over to you, Paula. When you look at what's transpired over the last 15 years or so, replacing coal with natural gas, along with system-wide efficiency improvements, have led to substantial greenhouse gas emission reductions. So how much more runway do you think we have there? And sort of tying into that, and I'll throw this open then to the panel, does gas continue to be that bridge to a lower carbon future? Or, as some argue, is it a hindrance to dramatic, deep decarbonization? But let's go first to you, Paula, with discussion about greenhouse gas reductions through gas.
Thanks for giving me the easy question. Appreciate that one. You know, I don't think gas is a hindrance. Again, I think it's it's a necessary, something that we're going to need to make this transition. And I would say start with the end in mind. If the end is deep decarbonization and reduction of greenhouse gas, then we shouldn't be deciding what's going to get us there. We should be figuring out what tools we need where to make that happen. And regions are different. And so there are some areas of the country where electrification may be the right solution. There are other areas of the country where it may be 100% renewables with storage and or with gas. We don't know. And so in my mind, what we should be thinking about is what are the tools that we have available today? What are the investments in infrastructure and R&D that we need to give us some proof positive of what's going to work? Because ultimately the goal is to decarbonize. The goal should not just be to get rid of a resource because we don't like it, because that does not mean that we are one, going to meet the ultimate goal that we have, but also we may create some other problems that we haven't thought about. And one such problem would be that, and something that we're talking about as an industry a lot today, right, is equity. And so all of this stuff also costs something. It costs consumers and businesses something, and we want it to be to the benefit of those same consumers and businesses. And I think unless we think about it in a very holistic way, we are prone to make mistakes and have some real unintended consequences that we had not considered. So in my mind, yes, gas has a role to play in whatever this decarbonized future is. And I think if we keep our eye on the ball, which is climate change, addressing climate change, reducing greenhouse gases, and economic growth, if you're talking about certainly the United States, if that is our focus, and not let's eliminate one fuel source for another, I think we'll get to better solutions.
That was great you brought up cost. You know, as I reviewed the very detailed summary of the IEA report earlier today, there's no mention of cost. So, except for how much.
Not free.
Yeah. So that's critically important as well. And can I open up that conversation then to Ross, perhaps? Your take on.
Jump in, and I thought Paula did a really nice job of talking about it. And so first, you know, natural gas has sort of been a punching bag lately. And you know, I've used this quote before, but you know, it's Mark Twain said, "News of my death is an exaggeration," and it's an absolute exaggeration for natural gas. Matter of fact, right now our story is more like Rocky Balboa, right? The true American underdog story, right, in the energy mix, because we are actually going to, when this all gets said and done in 2050 and we hit net zero, you're going to see the gas systems are a major part of how we manage that transition. But to Paula's point, it's going to be different solutions for different parts of the country. So you get up into the Northeast, right, the upper Midwest, right, gas systems are going to be part of it. But that gas system is going to be very different from the gas system we think about today. And there was one of our previous American Gas Association chairs described it this way, right? The future is not no gas, but the future is less gas. And that gas is going to be very, very different. That gas is going to be in the form of low carbon fuels, such as renewable natural gas, which has a great ability to scale across the US, as well as hydrogen, pure hydrogen and hydrogen blending. And, you know, this is a 30-year transition, right? This is a journey. And if this was Rocky 1, we're in round 1 of a 15-round fight, and there's 5 or 6 movies coming after this one, right? So there's a lot of R&D that has to happen to ensure that the infrastructure we're currently build will be ready for those low carbon fuels when we deliver them in the future. But this has to be a thoughtful, engineered transition. And you really need to think about things around reliability, resiliency, and as Paula pointed out before, affordability. Because affordability is critical for economic success of this country. So as we continue to move down this path, you're going to see a lot more work in all these areas. But I am confident, right, that when all this is said and done, that low carbon fuels and the pipeline systems are going to be an important component of that net zero future. Because there's one thing people don't realize is none of this works without forms of energy storage. So, batteries are forms of energy storage, but pipeline systems are incredible forms of energy storage, right? We pack those pipelines with gas overnight. We bleed them down at the very coldest points in the morning or in the evening when our customers need that energy the most. So as we look at the transition to green forms of energy and the intermittency issue that comes along with that, the energy storage is going to be a key point. And my previous role before taking over as COO, I was actually our group chief engineer for gas globally. And I've been involved in this journey with the UK for about 5 years. And they charged off initially down an electrify everything path and got about 2 or 3 years into it. And when the engineers started to really try to engineer those systems, they realized that that's not going to work. And if you look at what's happening over in the UK and Europe, you see an incredible amount of activity around RNG, hydrogen blending, because they realize that they need those forms of energy in order to make a net zero future work.
That's a great point you make there. Well, a number of great points, and maybe it's a nice way to segue to Richard on this. It does appear that Europe, with some of my dealings over there, is perhaps a little ahead of the United States as it relates to lower carbon gases, in particular hydrogen, but also renewable natural gas and so forth. Richard, could you speak just a little bit to the what the industry is doing in terms of sort of proving out concepts and getting prepared to leverage the current natural gas infrastructure in delivering lower carbon alternatives?
It's a great question, David, and well observed about what's happening in Europe. I just want to go back to something Ross said. I can't help but remark that Rocky 2 was very resilient, and maybe a parallel there with what we're talking about. Let's talk about why I think the Europeans had this aha moment around the gas system and the role of gases in achieving this significantly lower carbon energy economy. The gas system is, I mean, we've already talked about its kind of physical strength. I mean, you've got pipes under the ground, the resilience, even the reliability aspects. But what the gas system is really good at is delivering a lot of energy on the coldest days of the year when you need it most. And the gas system today delivers about 3 times more energy on the coldest days of the year than the electricity system does on the hottest. And that ratio goes up when the farther north you go. The heating loads matter here. And so I think what the recognition was that in Europe, and I think increasingly in the United States, is, well, let's look at all the options here. What are those different pathways available to us? And how do we think about system costs when we're also trying to think about how we meet energy demand on those coldest and hottest days of the year? And when you start to peel back the onion and you do the math, and you realize that the energy storage value of the gas system, its ability to deliver this amount of energy on those days, means that utilizing the gas system might be the lower cost way to go. In other words, we can meet our decarbonization or low carbon objectives more quickly, maybe more cost effectively, if we're keeping these gas opportunities on the table. Now, we can talk about those different pieces. I would say that there's probably at least 4 categories of emissions reduction opportunities that we need to be thinking about as we contemplate the role of the gas system. One, the end use reductions, and here, energy efficiency again is a cornerstone strategy, and it has to be. But also the use of advanced gas technologies. And I think right now in the US, there's probably not enough recognition that gas heat pumps can also play a key role in addition to air source heat pumps. And I think a lot of work still to do to prove that out and deploy that as a technology. Ross touched on the next piece, renewable gases as a category. So here we're talking about anaerobic digestion, Also, thermal gasification of like woody biomass. Take that woody biomass that might, contribute to wildfire, which we don't want, and let's convert it to usable fuels. And we also have like issues like hydrogen and methanated hydrogen. And then the last two pieces, which I'll just touch on briefly, but there's a lot of work to do there. Methane emission reductions, and those are key. And then the use of negative emissions technologies like carbon capture sequestration as an example. So there's a range of opportunities if we are keeping this fuel, natural gas, and the infrastructure that delivers it on the table.
Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about making sure that we're doing everything we can as an industry to minimize our environmental footprint today, which brings us to the topic of methane emissions, a powerful greenhouse gas. So how concerned should we be about flaring and other emissions across the value chain? And what's our take to, actually, what's it going to take to minimize that impact here going forward, such that the continued use of gas and its derivatives continue to provide benefits relative to some of the alternatives like coal, fuel oil, and so forth. But methane emissions in the focus. Who wants to tackle that one? Paul, I know you're on the board of a producer. Is that something you might want to take a crack at?
No, only because I don't think I'm well versed enough to
Okay.
really give you guys an intelligent response.
Well, then we're going to turn to our Chief Operating Officer and Chief Engineer, Ross, to give us a take on methane emissions.
So reduction of methane emissions is important. It's one of the biggest things we can do in the short term to make some grounds on the reduction of greenhouse gases. So you'll see right now, especially with a lot of utilities in the industry that have aged infrastructure, and we're one of them. We have one of the largest populations of cast iron and bare steel pipe in the country. So it's not only a great integrity-related program to increase the safety of the system, and I'll come back to that in a second, but it's also an incredible opportunity for leak reduction, right? So, National Grid right now, we're replacing about 400 miles of main a year, and all that main leaks and all that is leak reduction and reduced greenhouse gas emissions. Flaring is an important piece, right? And we need to be focusing on flaring and reducing flaring, not only in the production area, but all the way upstream into gas processing plants. And, even we operate LNG plants where we don't do regular flaring anymore. And then finally, the piece is that's really coming into focus now is just around gas pipeline operations and blowdown and purging procedures and the use of blowdown compressors where we can recapture that gas and instead of letting it vent to the atmosphere, put it back into the mains, right? But there's one thing I think that is critical, and I just do want to talk about safety for a second, right? Because if we're going to secure a place for gas in the future, we need to be focused in on safety in the short term. And I talk about this with my team all the time because 99.9% of them aren't working on the future heat, but they're out every day running a gas system and focusing in on the safety, the reliability and affordability and making sure all those things are right. Give us a seat at the table to be part of the discussion on the energy future and so that we can secure the right spot for gas in that mix.
And if we don't do our job right, we may face bans on natural gas usage and infrastructure building. And in fact, over the last couple of years, for instance, dozens of cities in California have taken up legislation or enacted rules to ban gas, at least to incentivize electrification through codes and standards. Is this an effective way to decarbonize systems? And if more cities follow suit, how does it affect the industry? But maybe even more importantly, how does this affect the affordability and resiliency of the electric grid and the energy grid in general? Richard, Paula, any thoughts on how we address the issue of bans to natural gas?
Yeah, what I would add, and you touched on it in your question, David, is that this affordability question is a big one. And I would suggest it's directly tied to, right, energy insecurity and energy justice and all these other issues that are societal issues. At a time, quite frankly, if we think about your first question, coming out of COVID, where energy is becoming more of a right than just a quality of life thing, because people are working from home, we're home all day. There is a growing number of voices of people who are saying, like, energy should be our right. We should have it no matter what, and there should not be the ability to kind of disconnect us from this service. But again, there's a cost that comes with that. And I'm not sure that we have thought about how do you find the balance between what is consumer affordability, again, in a context and framework where, and I believe it was Pew, the latest research tells us that if you define a low moderate income household in the United States, it's 81% of US households would be defined as low moderate income. So it's a big group of people. How are you going to balance that? Affordability, and again, decarbonization and these other goals. And so I think, unfortunately, if we're only looking at one side of the story, right, which is we want to ban natural gas because we want to decarbonize without consideration of the other impacts that can have, we are going to find ourselves in a very difficult position and making the kinds of choices that we actually, I don't think, as a society really want to make. And so it can be incredibly problematic. I think what you're starting to see, even in places like California, are communities that are stepping up and saying, no, we want natural gas. We're small businesses or restaurants, and we want natural gas for cooking. And we don't like this, that you're just banning it. You'll see in other states like New York, where you have a ban of new pipelines and new gas facilities, and now new consumers or potential consumers coming in and saying, we want gas, and being told by the utility company, we don't have capacity to serve you, right? And that creates this other problem, because it was a problem that we probably could have foreseen would happen, but didn't want to acknowledge it because we had something else that we wanted to get done. And so, you know, I think for some people, the complexities of this problem feels like we're trying to resist a transition, when in fact, a lot of times we're just trying to identify all the things that you need to consider in the decision making before you make the decision. You know, I no longer work in the gas industry, but I would suggest from the colleagues that I know, we are all well aware that we are transitioning to a decarbonized economy. None of us are resisting that. What we are saying is there are these other things that are going on that we need to consider, cost to consumer being one of them, stranded costs that companies have because they've already made these kinds of investments, additional costs that we're going to need, because even if you want to do full electrification, you still got to invest in transmission. You've got a lot of other infrastructure investments that you need to make. And we're not talking about the entire energy ecosystem in such a way that I think we could get to the kind of answers that we need. We're all going to give something, right? We're going to use natural gas, we're going to use natural gas, but we're going to use less of it. That's going to happen. But that doesn't mean that it should be 3 times more expensive, because we haven't thought about all the other stuff that's required. So I think just flat out bans without thinking about these other issues is a problem. And we're starting to see that in some communities, because people are starting to push back and are getting really kind of agitated by the fact that they don't have access to resources that they think they need.
Apologies for jumping in here. This is Kevin with Our Energy Policy. We would like to move to the Q&A session now. We have more than a few questions lined up. We want to make sure we can get through as many as possible. So moving through to the question list, our first question here is from Suzanne Hunt. What is being done to reduce natural gas leakage throughout the various parts of the system? An additional question as well, and what is a reasonable estimate for the climate impact of US methane leakage from fracking, wellheads, and distribution?
Ross, would you like to take at least the first part?
I can answer the first part, right? So, really basically straightforward, right, is just what I talked about before. The industry is out right now, not only from an integrity perspective, but also from a greenhouse gas emissions reduction, out replacing the aging infrastructure that leaks. You know, we've got big programs. There isn't a utility in the country that's not out doing that right now. You know, we've got teams of people that do the engineering work, that do the main replacement work. You know, we're replacing, you know, well over 200 miles of pipe this upcoming year in New York State in order to continue to drive that. We also do have some other leak programs where we're going out and fixing environmentally sensitive leak, high emitting leaks in order to continue to focus on that greenhouse gas reduction. So leak reduction is a big part of the program going forward.
In Orlando, I see you've popped on the screen, and you did touch on the upstream methane emissions and footprint reduction. Would you be able to provide a little bit more color on that topic for us?
Yeah, I mean, not much more to add except that I know the industry is doing a lot around this, producer industry. We have stepped up and using a number of new technologies, whether it's drones and other types of monitoring to make sure that we're tackling the leaks real time. Yeah, and I think the industry is coming together to, you know, to come up with a measurement process, a certification process. So all of that is quite frankly more progress than I would have thought has been made over the last year. So there's a lot of attention to this, which is a really good thing.
Yeah, I know there are a number of industry collaboratives. Clearly, ESG pressure from investors is requiring both action in terms of addressing emissions and also the transparency of reporting in those areas. So I think there's the entire industry is with the program, so to speak. Kevin, kick it back to you for another question.
Thank you very much. We've had a few questions come in on stranded assets. To kind of summarize, here's a question from Bob Wyman. How can natural gas utilities recover their costs without significant rate increases in states like New York that require dramatic reductions in sales in future years? How will costs of stranded assets be allocated and recovered?
That would seem to fall either into Ross or Richard's category here. Richard, do you have a view from AGA's perspective?
You want to go first, Richard?
Sure. I think one, we have to define what we mean by stranded assets. Certainly, if we're talking about utility systems, you know, I think there's concern that investments today in systems, the investments today may not be necessary because those systems won't be used in the future. I think that's predicated on the idea that these systems can't be repurposed or reused or utilized differently in the future. And we've already talked about the role of renewable gases. I think that that's one category that we might think about in terms of broadening our imagination and how we utilize this infrastructure in the future. So I'm not sure I'm ready to cede the point that there will be stranded assets necessarily on the gas system. And there are other parts of the industry, of course, we can talk about. I think that this infrastructure base can and will be used for many years to come to deliver natural gas cleanly and efficiently today, as well as to deliver the energy fuels of the future.
Yeah, just to build off of what Richard said, I'm in the same point. I don't think that we're going to have a significant stranded asset problem on the gas side of the business. What we are going to see is a transition in the mid-2020s through the 2030s on large deployment and scaling of RNG, right? And you know, I just talked about we're going to be commissioning a renewable natural gas plant in New York City this year at Mount Creek. You know, the largest wastewater treatment plant there, which is scheduled to come online this year. And then as we start to, you know, get into the 2030s, there'll be more scaling of RNG, and then there'll be a transition into hydrogen and hydrogen blends. And the full capacity of the gas system is going to continue to be needed at that point because hydrogen and hydrogen blends do have a lower heat value than natural gas, so you do need more capacity in the system to deliver the same amount of energy. So when we start to look out into the future, right, having the flexibility and the optionality with those systems to deliver those low carbon fuels, even though they do have a little bit of a lower heat value, you're still going to need all those assets. And that storage capability and the ability to have a dispatchable form of energy that's readily available to you is just critical when you start to look at balancing intermittency and other issues associated with building a net zero future.
Very clearly, that very robust and extensive infrastructure, which totals about 2.5 million miles across the US, which compares favorably to the 2.6 million miles of paved roads, is quite an asset when it comes to energy storage, gas delivery, perhaps carbon capture and storage being run in reverse at some point. So there's a lot of value today and a lot of optionality in the future. Kevin, another question?
We have more than a few left. To kind of build off those answers, we do have a question here about RNG, which hopefully can give us a quick answer. From Alyssa Sporer, given consumers' increasing interest in sustainability and lowering greenhouse gas emissions, how much do you foresee renewable natural gas production and use replacing conventional natural gas in the next 10 to 20 years?
Richard, do you want to take a crack at it, and maybe I can supplement?
We're doing work right now, and AGA, and really in support of the American Gas Foundation, has done some work to evaluate the resource potential of renewable natural gas in the United States. And the resource is substantial. And the emissions reduction opportunities associated with that renewable natural gas resource is similarly substantial. But it's going to take investment, it's going to take deployment, and importantly, the cost elements can come down, but those two will require additional deployment. So I think there's a lot of work established today on that potential, and there's work that we're doing right now. And I'll just say that as we examine these issues more carefully, more closely, we are starting to understand that there's even more potential than we realized previously. So I'll leave it at that. I think there's more to be said on RNG. I don't have a number I can tell you about how much RNG is going to be in the mix in 20 years. You know, different companies, different parts of the country are going to have different perspectives on that. But I think it's going to play a meaningful role in the energy delivered to customers in the years ahead.
Thank you very much for that. Moving on. Anyone else like to answer? Apologies.
No, just let me add to Richard's point there. So, yeah, we call it biogas, but the biogas is in the U.S., the opportunities are expanding. BP, we are purchasing biogas for the transport sector, and that's growing in multiples. And so that you continue to see more digesters and a number of opportunities rise across the country. So it is, to Richard's point, I don't have the exact number or forecast, but I can tell you that projects there's a lot of attention to it, and yeah, and specifically for the transport sector right now.
Yeah. Just to build on one thing with the renewable natural gas, one of the critical things that we have to get in place with our state regulators is the right incentives and regulatory frameworks that are going to incent the developers to develop the renewable natural gas in our area. And the biggest obstacle to that tends to be the interconnection issue. So the developers are getting really good at understanding what it costs them to build and operate a plant. They need to build that plant near that waste stream. And that works out really well for a project like Newtown Creek, where that waste stream is right in the middle of an extensive gas system. But when you get out in a dairy farm or a hog farm where it's far away from our gas system, then there's a high cost of interconnection, which then makes that project unprofitable. So we need to get the right regulatory frameworks in place that incents and sort of socializes that interconnection cost, and that'll incent more and more RNG development.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We've had several questions come in on this, one of which was directed to Paula as part of the ASC. Curious for your stance here. We often hear natural gas referred to as a bridge fuel. Can you discuss your views on this concept, and if the goal is the eventual elimination of natural gas, what does this mean for the industry now?
Yeah, so, when we were talking about transitioning out of coal, then natural gas was kind of the bridge fuel so that you use something that was cleaner than coal. I think for the Alliance and our stance is that we support the efficient use of natural gas. We are not an organization that is saying, get rid of natural gas. That is not our perspective. We want to see an efficient use of natural gas through our appliances, through our manufacturing systems, et cetera. I think natural gas, as I started, still has a huge role to play as we decarbonize and after we decarbonize. It will be new technologies that we'll be using. It may be hydrogen gas, maybe hydrogen, maybe renewable gas. I think there's a role for natural gas. And as long as, we are focused on addressing the big challenge, which is decarbonizing our systems, how we get there and the tools by which we use that and what the fuels are is secondary in my mind. But certainly for the Alliance, we want everything to be as efficient as we can possibly make it, while at the same time balancing affordability for consumers and businesses.
Great, thank you. I think we do have time for one more question here. This is from Tom Haywood. The energy sector is increasingly adopting net zero carbon targets by 2050, but will it mollify opponents who are increasingly saying that all fossil fuel use has to stop by mid-century? What is the strategy to sell net zero targets to a hardening opposition?
So maybe I'll jump in, because I think we're given our recent events in New York State and downstate New York State with the whole Nessie pipeline, we've sort of been at the sort of the crossroads of this. And what I try to do is I try to talk to about it from a very fact-based perspective, right? And start to lay out what are the issues and problems that need to be addressed. And as you start to get the engineers together and let them really engineer the energy system of the future, you start to readily see that, the electrification of everything isn't the right path. But there is a transition to what I said before is low carbon fuels, right? That is what is really going to be part of the mix. So whether we're producing what Orlando said before, like blue hydrogen, right? Hydrogen from natural gas with carbon capture. Carbon capture is starting to come back into the discussion in the U.S. It's up and running in Europe and the UK. I sit on a carbon capture steering committee with our UK businesses, right? They're already out there looking at it. They've got demonstration projects, actually beyond demonstration projects, that are up and running and starting to be built around industrial hubs and clusters. So as we start to get into this, right now we are starting to see what I would say is some changes in some of our stakeholders. The realization that electrify everything won't work. We just National Grid, Con Ed, and New York City just sponsored a pathway study for a low carbon future in New York. And even when you get out in the most aggressive electrify everything scenarios in 2050, you're still getting 4 gigawatts of energy out of the gas systems. So they're going to be part of it. They're going to be part of the mix, right? And it's just getting people into fact-based discussions about it and letting the engineers really solve the problems. And as you start to get into that, the resistance starts to soften and people start to realize that they need a variety of solutions to deliver net zero.
So it appears we're reaching the end of our very enlightening conversation. I think, Bill, before we turn it back over to you, I'd like to offer to the panelists just their opportunity to provide maybe a brief additional comment on something that we perhaps didn't cover in today's conversation. Something that I hope we can talk about that prepares this industry for what should be a very promising future. Paul, I'll go to you first.
I think what I would just invite people to do is, as they're thinking about natural gas and the solutions for decarbonization, do not forget about efficiency. And you know, I've talked a lot today about gas efficiency, but the same would go for electricity. If we were 100% electrified, my talking point probably wouldn't change all that much. And then invite people to, you know, visit the Alliance on our website, learn more about the work that we're doing, and participate in our coalition if it interests you.
Great. Thank you, Paula. Richard, over to you.
There are a wide range of gas end use and supply technologies that can contribute to achieving our climate change targets, our emissions reduction goals. Let's be expansive of the tools in the toolbox. Let's not limit any options as we set out to meet this challenge.
Ross.
I'll just go back to one of the things I said before, right? The news of our death is greatly exaggerated. You know, we're gonna be part of the energy mix in 2050, and right now we do seem like Rocky Balboa, right? That great American underdog Southpaw horse story out of Philadelphia. But really, that's what we are. And to Richard's point, we are resilient. You know, we've made an energy transition before. We transitioned from manufactured gas in our pipelines to natural gas, and that had a whole array of things where we had to get into everybody's house and change out things at the burner tip. So this is not something that we can't do if we are thoughtful and we engineer it.
Thank you. And Orlando, you had the first word. How about the last word?
Yeah, no, I couldn't have said it better. I mean, Ross just summarized it, but I would say, I'll say it again, as an industry, this is the time where we need to come together and inform and you know, make sure our voices are heard, and we're letting policymakers know about gas and all the things that we are doing as an industry. That is, to me, something we must do.
Thank you all for an entertaining discussion. Bill, back to you.
That's my cue. Thanks, David. And I want to thank all of you, Orlando, Ross, Richard, and Paula, and David, for this really superb conversation on such an important topic, and one I think that is really top of mind for so many people, to try to sort through how this works through the transition, what technology you know, potentially will bring to change things, how the economics work. I'd like to encourage everyone. We're going to host an online discussion for all of you in the community, and for those of you whose questions we couldn't get to, I know we couldn't get to everyone. We'll have that posted within the next day or two on the Our Energy Policy site. Please weigh in, join this conversation. We're then going to publish a summary of the really brilliant insights we heard today, as well as the conversation on the line. And so we're going to make that available, as we always do, to congressional offices, the administration, state energy offices, working with governments and with the media. I'd also like to encourage you again to go to our Energy Library, which is the resource that we make available for everyone, and has thousands and thousands of reports, studies, articles, which is you know, available for everyone to take advantage of. And then finally, I'm going to put in a little plug. A number of the issues that were raised today in the conversation, including innovations in technology and carbon capture, we're going to be having upcoming webinars on those issues. We have a CCUS one planned next month. We have a technology one planned very shortly. So encourage all of you to join for those. Finally, my deepest thanks to our co-host BP, again to all of you on the panel, to those of you in the audience who've taken your time today. Stay well, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thanks to our partners and to BP, and have a great day. Thanks, everybody.